From a deadly helicopter crash, to crashing their car into a wall, to falling through the floor of their own house, this is how the biggest US billionaires died and what happened to their wealth. But spoiler, while some donated everything they had, leaving almost nothing to their family, others died completely unexpectedly, and their billions squandered faster than your girlfriend could max out your credit card. But let's start from the beginning. You likely haven't heard of USA's very first billionaire, John Jacob Astor. He lived through the 18th century and died in 1848, primarily trading fur and investing into New York real estate. And the crazy part is that his net worth is speculated to be $150 billion in today's money. He died at 84, and we don't have much details on the cause of his death, other than people just saying he was old, which does qualify him as the most boring death on our list. He left the bulk of his wealth to his son, William B. Astor Sr., while endowing $400,000 USD to create the Astor Library, a predecessor of the New York Public Library. But if you were speculating that he died from his boring fur business, the next guy did something a bit more fun. Cornelius Vanderbilt was one of the first steam-powered magnates in the US, and no, he wasn't a steam-powered machine himself like the one from Facebook, but he developed the railway and steamboat industries while earning a bit of cash in the process. His net worth reached an equivalent of $185 billion, and he died in 1877 at his home in Manhattan. After roughly 8 months of being confined to his rooms, reports gave the immediate cause as exhaustion from long-standing chronic disorders, including dementia, which was likely linked to an old syphilis infection. In his will, Vanderbilt left about 90% of his estate to his son William H. Vanderbilt and William's 4 sons, who doubled the fortune within 9 years. And while you have no idea who that guy was, the next guy is one of the most remembered today, because you likely stare at his name daily if you're a part of the Matrix and give all of your money to Chase so they could make even more money from it and charge you on top of that, because he is JP Morgan. After convincing everyone to give him their money, he died at Rome's Grand Hotel in 1913. After several weeks of declining health following an Egyptian tour, likely because he realized he'll never be able to convince the pharaohs to give them their money. But boring historians conveniently overlooked that and said he suffered from an acute attack of gastroenteritis that left him unable to eat or drink. Doctors tried feeding him by injection, and he slipped in and out of consciousness before dying in his sleep. After his body was returned to New York, Wall Street paused trading at his funeral because they gave away all their money to him. Most of his estate and control of the banking house passed to his son, JP Morgan Jr. His celebrated art holdings, valued in the tens of millions, became a defining legacy of the Morgan Library and New York museums. But if you thought that guy was picky for remembering to charge you half a cent for every random transaction, the next billionaire is the only woman on our list. Likely because she didn't buy clothes that she wouldn't wear or food that she wouldn't eat, or her boyfriend took back his card. Hetty Green mostly stuck to the most boring business there was at the time, which means she was an investor, especially in real estate, which was just like the first guy. It's safe to assume that she died of boredom in 1916 at age 81, at her son's New York City apartment after months of declining health, marked by a series of strokes. When you need to save money, you live with your parents. But when you don't need to save money, you still live with your parents, so they can save money. Either way, you're in the middle of a heated argument about being a 35-year-old professional gamer, or in this case, the debate that killed her. Skim Milk versus the one with the red cap. Legend has it that the final stroke came mid-argument, proving that you can build a billion-dollar fortune 2.5 cents at a time. Hetty's green wealth was eventually split between her 2 kids, Ned and Sylvia. Ned even managed his sister's trust for a while, but since he died childless, Sylvia wound up controlling almost everything. And when she passed, most of the money went to a charity, a few cents more than Hetty probably would have approved of. Now, while Hetty hoarded pennies and left her fortune to her kids, who gave it away anyway, our next billionaire cut out the middleman and just gave away almost all of his wealth himself. And somehow, he didn't even make a monetized YouTube video about it. Andrew Carnegie is pretty much the reason why you don't sleep in a cardboard box, unless you live in California, in which case you do sleep in a cardboard box, and it costs $3,000 a month plus parking. Carnegie was the first to mass produce and distribute steel, which made him worth the modern equivalent of $400 billion. He died in 1990 from bronchonemia, which honestly sounds like something you would catch from another planet, or maybe just in Canada. Experts say his wealth declined faster because he was heartbroken by the outbreak of World War I, which crushed his lifelong dream of world peace. Unlike most billionaires, he gave away almost everything during his life and left what remained to charity. His family got basically nothing, which brings us to the next billionaire. Officially, the first US billionaire. He had over $1 billion before adjusting for inflation, making him the richest American in history, even richer than Mr. Tweet himself. John D. Rockefeller basically built the oil industry in America. For decades, Standard Oil was a near monopoly, and by the time he died in 1937, his fortune would be worth around $600 billion today. He lived to 97, passing away in Florida from arteriosclerosis. By then, most of his money had already been funneled into philanthropic foundations, universities, and medical research. The rest was tucked into a family trust so the Rockefellers could stay billionaires for generations. Now, Rockefeller gave us gas stations, but the guy who gave us auto shops, that was Henry Ford. And if you don't get that joke, you probably drive a Toyota. Ford spent 44 years cranking out essentially the same car until he was finally satisfied. On April 7th, 1947, he died at 83 from a stroke, under pretty dramatic circumstances. A flood had knocked out power at his Dearborn estate. The house was cold, lit only by candles and kerosene lamps. Earlier that day, he was happily checking flood damage. That night, he suddenly fell ill and died beside his wife, Clara. At his peak, Ford was worth $200 billion. Most of it went to the Ford Foundation, and the company itself passed on to his grandson, Henry Ford II. If Ford was famous for paying his workers well, J. Paul Getty was famous for being stingy. Getty made $12 billion pumping oil, but what people remember is how he reacted when his grandson was kidnapped. The ransom was a couple $1 million, and Getty refused to pay until the kidnappers mutilated the boy. He eventually coughed up $2.2 million because it was a tax deduction. The other $800,000, he loaned it to his son at a 4% interest. Getty saved his money, but destroyed his family relationships. He died in 1976 at 83 from a heart failure, alone in a massive mansion. His fortune mostly went to the Getty Trust, which turned into one of the world's richest art museums. Now here is where it gets interesting. What really separates the good billionaires from the bad ones isn't their money. It's what happens to their descendants. The Rockefellers, for example, are still billionaires today, and one of the most infamous stories is Nelson Rockefeller. On paper, Nelson was a classic Rockefeller businessman, worth around $5 billion. But the way he died in 1979, that's where the rumors start. His family told the media he died at his Rockefeller Center office while working on a book, but the truth came out later. He was actually in a Manhattan townhouse with his 25-year-old aide, Megan Marshak. Reports suggest the heart attack happened during an intimate encounter. Marshak delayed calling for an ambulance, and by the time help arrived, Nelson was gone. The family cremated him almost immediately. His wealth, like the rest of the Rockefeller fortune, was tied up in tax-avoiding trusts. Because if there's one thing billionaires hate more than kidnappers, it's taxes. And while the Rockefellers stayed wealthy, the richest family in America today is the Waltons, the Walmart dynasty. One of the most tragic Walton stories is John T. Walton. He was a Vietnam veteran, a skilled pilot, and in 2005 he crashed while flying a home-built ultralight aircraft in Wyoming. Cause? A loose flight control component, though some joked it must have been made with Walmart parts. Walton was just 58 and at his peak was worth $28 billion, making him the fourth richest American at the time. After his death, about half went into charities, a third to his son Lucas, and the rest to his wife Christy, who also inherited his Walmart shares.
While John's death was one of the more dramatic, this next billionaire probably had the most random death on this list. Ken Hendricks was the co-founder of ABC Supply, which sold roofing products. At the time of his death, his net worth was equivalent to $5 billion. He died very unexpectedly when, in 2007, he was at his home in the Afton, Wisconsin, and he simply fell through his floor and into the garage, suffering massive head injuries. He died the following morning at a local hospital at age 66. His wife, Diane Hendricks, became the chairperson of both ABC Supply and Hendricks Holding Company, and continued to run the businesses, growing her late husband's wealth significantly since then. Staying with the theme of crashing through the floor, the next guy actually died in a more traditional way, getting crashed by a car. Charles Wiley ran several businesses, with the main one being a chain of stores called Michael's, which he could have named Charlie's. Not sure where that came from. This stretched Charles's pockets to about $1.3 billion. In 2011, at 77 years old, he died in a car crash near Aspen, Colorado, when he was driving his Porsche and turning left, and another car struck the driver's side of his vehicle. Wiley was transported to Aspen Valley Hospital, but was pronounced dead shortly after noon. At that time, he was being investigated for fraud, and soon after his death, his estate, along with his brother, was found guilty of securities fraud and ordered to pay $299 million, and an additional $800 million the IRS decided he owed in back taxes. His widow, Dee Wiley, filed for bankruptcy in 2014, stating that she was cash flow insolvent and her income had dropped significantly. But you'll love this next billionaire because he created your most favorite pastime, the iPhone. And while Steve Jobs wasn't able to get anywhere close to a Samsung, he did manage to accumulate an equivalent of $14 billion. In 2003, he was first diagnosed with a rare, slow-growing form of pancreatic cancer. And at first, Jobs didn't want to get conventional medical treatment like surgery for approximately 9 months, and favored alternative medicines including diet and acupuncture. He eventually underwent a Whipple procedure in 2004 to remove the tumor, but despite the initial surgery, the cancer spread, and in 2009, Jobs had to receive a liver transplant. His health continued to decline, leading him to take a medical leave of absence in January 2011, and ultimately resign as Apple's CEO in August of the same year. He eventually died at age 56 on October 5th, 2011, peacefully at home in Palo Alto, California, surrounded by his family. His last words were recorded as, "Oh wow, oh wow, oh wow." The majority of his fortune, estimated at over $10 billion, was inherited by his wife, Laureen Powell Jobs. She has since dedicated a significant portion of the wealth to philanthropic endeavors through her organization, Emerson Collective. She has also publicly stated that she and Steve did not believe in legacy wealth building and that the family fortune would end with her, meaning it would not be passed down to their children. But if you thought that story was sad, the next billionaire allegedly crashed his car into a concrete wall on purpose. This guy was Aubrey McClendon, who ran Chesapeake Energy, which produced natural gas and drilled for oil. He was indicted on a federal charge of conspiring to rig bids for oil and natural gas leases, and just a day after, on March 2nd, 2016, Aubrey McClendon drove his Chevrolet Tahoe at 88 miles per hour into a concrete overpass wall in Oklahoma City. According to police, there was plenty of opportunity for him to steer away and get back on the roadway, but he did not even try. McClendon was not wearing a seatbelt either. His death was officially ruled an accident, and an autopsy showed he had suffered multiple blunt force trauma, with no alcohol or drugs in his system other than a trace of doxylamine, which is found in sleep aids. After his death, many creditors came out, claiming over $1.1 billion against his estate, and while he was once estimated to have a net worth of over $1 billion, lawyers for creditors argued the estate was insolvent due to his significant debts. So they had to sell off most of his assets to repay lenders. If you thought dying in a car crash like that is crazy, wait till you hear how the next billionaire died in a helicopter crash. Chris Klein made his wealth from coal production and made an equivalent of $2 billion. On July 4th, 2019, a day before his 61st birthday, he was flying in a helicopter from his private island, Big Grand Cay, to Fort Lauderdale, Florida for medical treatment after getting sick during a birthday party, when his helicopter spun out and crashed into the ocean. This tragedy also killed his daughter, 3 of her friends, and the 2 pilots. It has not been publicly revealed what happened to his wealth after this. And to wrap things up, the last billionaire perhaps died in the coolest type of crash. James Crown did a little bit of everything with his businesses, but he was lucky enough to belong to a wealthy family, so he primarily ran the family investment firm and was involved in extensive philanthropic works. On June 25th, 2023, he was celebrating his 70th birthday at the Aspen Motorsports Park in Colorado, which is completely coincidentally near the same place where Charles Wiley, who we looked at earlier, crashed his car. Following his example, James Crown drove his racing car right into an impact barrier at full speed. The cause of death was ruled an accident, and a racetrack employee suggested the crash may have occurred after Crown locked up the car's brakes on the final straightaway, causing the vehicle to skid into a gravel bed before hitting the tire and concrete barrier. His family mostly kept the proceeds of his wealth private. Which leads us to today, with 1,135 billionaires still living in the wild, still doing things like avoiding taxes, launching their sports cars into space, and tweeting about fart coins at 3 a.m. And with improving healthcare and their ever-widening pockets, they're dying off as slow as ever, with their average life expectancy increasing from around 80 years in the 19th century to 88 years today. Although, as per my research, more and more billionaires are dying tragic or accidental deaths today. And here are the most insane facts to leave you with. John Jacob Astor IV, the grandson of John Jacob Astor I, who was the first on our list, went down with the Titanic. Another 20th century billionaire, Howard Hughes, was heavily addicted to drugs and locked himself in hotel rooms until he wasted away and died, basically a skeleton weighing only 90 pounds at 6 feet 4 inches. And finally, Elon Musk hasn't died yet, but judging by the way he tweets, the man's gonna go out live on X.